Hey everybody, welcome to the Youtini Roundtable for Death Troopers by Joe Schreiber. This is our October Roundtable, and how fitting it is. My name is Charles. I am a writer and user analyst for Youtini, and I'm joined here by a great team, a great panel of some of our full Youtini team. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves one at a time. And when you introduce yourselves, guys, if you could start this panel like we do all of them and let me know what you would rate this book on a 1 to 10. No stipulations, no explanation, just give me a 1 to 10. Eric, let's start with
All
you.
right, let's do it. I am Eric. I am the managing editor over at Youtini, and I would give Death Troopers an 8 out of 10.
Hi, I'm Heather Goldman, aka Kylo Ren. I give the book a 7.
Hi, I'm Meg. I write for Youtini for our blog and email newsletter. I will give the book a 6 out of 10.
Right. Hi, my name is Rick. I'm a content director for the company, and I put together the monthly magazine. And I would give Death Troopers a 5 out of 10.
Okay, all right. And just to round things off, I'm going to give it a 6. So I'm really interested to hear why you guys are feeling that way. But kind of from the top, I'm curious: is anyone here like a big horror fan? Anyone at all? Rick, I see you nodding. You're really into that.
Mm.
Um, Insofar as the story is really good, I like affecting or I don't know. I call it troubling horror movies. Like I don't like every Saw movie, the first one. I like classic horror movies, which I'm actually afraid to name live on Facebook because I think they make me a creeper. But I like a really effective horror story. So yeah, it's a genre I enjoy a lot.
Okay, all right. Yeah, and anyone else?
I cannot handle horror. As much as I love this book, like I saw Insidious and I couldn't sleep for days. And every time I watch my boyfriend play a horror game, I'm just in the corner with my pillow hiding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't really do horror that well. Like I've been getting more into it lately, but I never saw any of the classics like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, like the OG. I totally missed that wave. So when I started watching like kind of bad horror, I would just try to think about the special effects and what the acting was like and really take myself out of it so I wouldn't be scared. So I would see it as a project instead of a horrifying thing. And I don't know if I've ever been able to shut that off and fully immerse in horror.
Okay, Meg, you're the only one I haven't heard from. Are you paralyzed with fear just thinking of horror films, or what are your thoughts?
I would prefer not to be scared. So no thanks. I'm good.
Yeah, okay. All right, so Rick is going to be our horror expert overall because I'm kind of with some of y'all. I normally don't go after horror things. I'm a big fan of the original Halloween. For some reason, that's one of the first horror films I ever saw, and it scared me to my absolute core. So let's talk about horror in Star Wars. We're going to start this off, guys. Name your favorite Star Wars book character who is also a vegetable. I will go first. Kale. All right, Eric, you're up.
Uh, uh,
I kid. I kid. No, really. So Kale and Trig, some of the first characters that we met, both relatively young characters, right? Both in their teens. I don't remember if they said exactly how old Trig was. I want to say 13.
I think 13, yeah, something like
13,
that.
okay. And they are basically on a giant prison barge with some of the nastiest, most brutal criminals in the entire galaxy. What did that do to frame this story? To have relatively young, innocent characters be your initial look into this story, what life is like on the purge, all of these things. Did that add something to the horror, or what were your thoughts on that? Eric, you go first.
I think it was a really unique way to start. I think it enhanced the horror a bit for me because I feel like when we watch prison shows or watch anything about jail, we kind of get, oh, the hardened guy's point of view. And even if you're looking at the good protagonist that didn't do it or whatever, they're still at least capable of holding their wits. And a 13-year-old kid on a prison ship is already horrifying because he's a kid. He's really scared of everyone. He hopes his older brother will take care of him, but that initially set up this kind of vibe of unease and terror, even before all the horrible, bio stuff started happening. Just if it was only about a 13-year-old kid that was afraid in prison, that is a horror story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Rick, what do you think about that?
Um, I mean, a great story always chooses a good POV character, and um, I think a child more than anybody is at risk. The danger to a child is a lot worse, especially in the case of this book. A child left on his own. He may have his brother, but they don't have their father anymore at the start of the story, and the horror of the story is not known to them when we get there. So, as a conduit for the reader, it's a great thing because you're already thinking like that little kid who's stuck on this terrifying prison barge, and then you're confronted with the wonderful tropes of a zombie outbreak, and that can be pretty effective. But I mean, for me, the two characters there, the drama of the brothers, the disagreements, and the trouble they get into beforehand. For me, I was more worried about them surviving the zombie issue because of their own foibles than I was the immediate danger. So I actually like that part of the story quite a bit.
Yeah.
Good choice for it being a kid.
Great. Heather, what do you think?
Um, yeah, I agree with all of you guys. I think having a young person as the main character, it really adds a sense of dread, more consequence, because I mean, these kids, they haven't really seen much of anything like this, and they still have their lives ahead of them. There's more at stake. And just seeing all of this through more innocent eyes added a lot.
Absolutely. Meg, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think kids and like when you're younger, you're just naturally very, very curious about everything and you just want to know what's happening all the time, wherever you are. And throughout the whole thing, it's like Trig just wants to know like what's going on. How am I gonna get through this? Am I gonna have my brother at the end of this? But also the fact that his brother at this point is like all he has left. And so I think the horror aspect of like I don't want to lose the only person that I care about. Him being so young, I think added a lot and just kind of made the story made me care about the characters a lot more.
Yeah, yeah, it kind of elevated everything, right? It wasn't just about being scared of being eaten by a zombie. It was losing, family, these very high stakes things. Um, and so, Rick, you kind of brought this up. Their father, uh, was it Von Longo?
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm forgetting. Okay, Von Longo. The way that we're kind of introduced to him is really through learning that he had been more or less murdered by Sartoris, who was one of the prison captains aboard the Purge. Did we ever get the full story behind why that happened? Does anyone recall actually hearing the full story as to why Sartoris killed Longo?
I feel like I don't think we got a here's what happened flashback, second by second thing,
Right.
but I think it was more or less spelled out enough that, this is a guard who has a history of temper issues and wanted to find out some information and just went too far, and it was like almost a meaningless casualty to him. And I wonder if that was an intentional author decision to be like, it's not even worth remembering for the guard why he killed this man. So we as an audience don't get to know that because it's not even worth discussing. And I think that kind of makes it even a little more horrific that like this last man's final moments were so forgettable to the guy who killed him.
Yeah,
That's awesome. I didn't even get that.
that's a really interesting take actually. I'm one where I want like all the information. I mean like that's
Oh,
why
hell yeah,
I'm
sure.
buying the behind the scenes books, all these things, but that's actually the intentionally leaving that out. That's really interesting. I like that actually. And so speaking about Sartoris, did you guys like that? That was kind of his introduction. Is that he was basically introduced as this monster of a guy. It might have been Dr. Cody who initially remembered the event, but basically just knowing that he had murdered who were the original main character's father. Meg, let's start with you. What did you think about Sartoris' introduction?
Um, I think that was, I mean, considering the book as a whole, I think that was the right way to start it. Just because like you're going to get sort of inside his head, and from his perspective, what's going on a little bit later as the book goes on. And so starting it with like, oh, this is who this person is, this is how he behaves, this is what he does. That's kind of terrifying because you're like, do I want to know what's going through his head? I mean, so yeah, I definitely think like if you could consider him kind of like a villain type character, introducing him that way is definitely an effective way to do it.
Absolutely. Heather, what do you think?
Um, as far as Sartoris and what he did to it was Vaughn, right? Vaughn
Hmm.
Longo.
I think so. I
Um,
should look it up. I have the book right here.
the name is kind of forgettable, even though they say it a lot.
It's Von
But
Longo. That's their dad's name.
Hmm.
yeah, that whole situation in their past, I don't know, it was a little too vague for me. Charles, I'm like you, I like everything spelt out, so I didn't really pick up on everything. Um, it kind of seems like the character of Sartoris, he was put in there just to kind of drive some plot points. But yeah, other than that, I don't know if like I would call him a good villain. I feel like he was just used for as a tool for the sake of the story.
Okay. Rick, what do you think about that?
Well, Heather brings up a good point, but I think how to put this? It sort of falls in line with the tropes of this genre because the villain is the outbreak. The villain is the zombies. Like we don't even really get into who or how it was created or really the why of the virus or what have you. But it's about all of these disparate types of people. The prisoners who don't deserve to be there, the doctor who happens to be there, the guards. So the zombie movies are usually a playground for the dynamics of how people interact in a crisis situation. Because like a good zombie movie, a classic zombie movie is supposed to be like a good window into like us, how we would react in a panic or crisis situation. So I think not having them fleshed out very much is fine because it's about how, based on their personalities, they survive. So I mean, yeah, Sartoris was definitely a trope, an archetypal sort of. I have the keys to the cells and I have all the control and the power after everything goes to hell. But that character, you see him in lots of zombie stories. Um, so for me, I don't mind not knowing. For me, it's like, how are they going to survive? How are they going to get through this trouble? You know, everybody's dying left and right. How could they possibly make it? That's the fun of a zombie story for me. So I like that the book just sets those things up in a classic way and kind of knocks them down. Because the fun of a zombie movie, if you're honest with yourself, is watching people get eaten.
Yeah.
That's
And
the
there was
best part.
plenty
Good
of
old
that.
fun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Eric, did you have anything to add about that?
Um, yeah, just to say that I think that a lot of Star Wars books I've been reading lately, especially, have this thing about people that work for the Empire actually being good and actually wanting to help, and like it's the Empire, like I feel like we forget that
agree.
sometimes. Like they're evil, so I think
Really
having a
evil.
character that, yeah, he murdered a guy because he was angry. Yeah, he works for the Empire. He's probably
Yeah.
gonna do stuff like that, and I think it was nice to have not the, oh great, how is he gonna change into a rebel by the end of the book? Like, no, he just works for the Empire. He sucks. Moving on.
Haven't you seen the
Yeah.
Clone Wars episodes with like the Bonteris where there are some people on the Confederate side who are like normal people?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You don't
Seen
believe in
those.
that?
Just
I don't.
admit
I
they're
mean,
evil and let's go on to the rest of the zombies. That was nice.
yeah. Zombies, please.
Yes,
Let's get one
absolutely.
zombie.
And that's a great point, Eric. Just originally when Star Wars came out, the Empire was just evil, right? And it has been more of a recent phenomenon to be like, well, let's sympathize with these guys and let's show some people that you can actually maybe root for on that side. And that's
Mm-hmm.
fun in and of itself, but it also felt good to kind of get back to the root of how just how bad these guys are. They created this virus. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so as far as that goes, what do you think? Rick, you're probably the good one to start with on this one. What do you think about this being essentially an Empire created virus that sort of started this entire chain of things? As zombie movies go, is it always going to be a virus? What kind of things do you normally see?
Well, in the classic zombie movies, like take your original Dawn of the Dead,
Hmm.
the virus outbreak is never explained. The people that are under siege from the zombies never have any sort of system by which to go like, let's go to the archives and figure out what's wrong. It's the world is over, and it's about how people survive. Like that's why the first season of The Walking Dead was so great until they
Mm-hmm.
are like, let's go to the CDC and get some answers. You're like, I mean, okay, like it doesn't matter. It's not what these stories are about.
Yeah, sure. You
Um,
won't get
but
them,
as
but fine.
yeah, like as far within the context of Star Wars, if we're chalking it up to something that the evil Empire would do, in a bid to get more power or assert more dominance and control, it's probably the wackiest thing. I mean, this book was definitely a late era Legends experiment, which was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah.
But like, this book is almost a Legends within Legends now. It's like so beyond the pale, of what you could consider Star Warsy, which is fine because it owns that completely. It does not pretend to follow any sort of hero's journey, and it doesn't have the tropes of Star Wars, and it's not adventurous. It's grim and gritty and gross, which I like. But as far within the context of the story, yeah, I'm not remotely shocked or surprised, and I actually enjoy that the Empire is evil enough to raise the dead.
Okay. All right. So it kind of follows along with some of the classic things in terms of this being a virus, but it actually points to the person that did it or the entity that did it in this case, and within the confines of Star Wars, that works. That's kind of the right
Yeah,
framework.
fine with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about some of the other big characters that were in this book. Star Wars, all the way back to A New Hope, has had a tradition of very strong female characters. It started with Leia. It goes all the way up to the most recent Disney films with Rey and Jyn Erso. And this book really put another female character very much in the lead, and very even amongst the survivors aboard the Purge, in a leadership role. So Zahara Cody, how did she add to the team? What did she bring to the story? And how did she, or maybe didn't she, in your mind, live up to this long tradition of strong female characters? Um, Heather, let's start with you this time.
Dr. Cody, I really liked her character because, given her background and the situation, she seemed to be like the more realistic. Um, the way she ended up on the purge, it wasn't like, oh, I really wanted to be here or I really don't want to be here. She kind of thought that, it was a good idea, but she's getting kind of tired of it. And then when everything breaks out, she went there to be a good doctor, and just seeing all of the patients die around her, she started feeling that sense of dread, but at the same time she felt the need to do something about it because that's just in her moral code as a doctor. Even exposing herself to the virus and everything, but all the way down to when Kale was injured, and she thought, I messed up this far. Maybe I can redeem myself with, helping this kid. And then, he dies and she drops him immediately. But it's like she knows when she's beaten, but she still does what she can to help the situation. And to me, that's more realistic than being either like, one side or the other. She reacted appropriately, is what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Rick, what are your thoughts on Dr. Cody?
Well, going back to the tropes of the genre, she's a part of an ensemble. She's a mechanism. Like, if you wanted to really demystify everything, you need someone there who can explain what the hell's going on as much as is possible. Otherwise, you have a bunch of scared, people getting eaten. So you need some sort of sensical thing. But I liked her bit of backstory. Being the sort of spoiled rich girl wanting to get rid of the confines of her enriched lifestyle, and her family dismisses her choice of being a doctor on a barge, or with the Empire saying, "Well, it's just a little experiment you're doing. You'll come back." Um, I like that because it's kind of true. That's probably who she was. I mean, if you come from her background, you probably are affected the way she is. She probably is a spoiled, sort of highly educated and privileged young lady who comes through in a time of crisis. So, like, she gets tested to the max in this book, and I really enjoyed it. And she is a strong female character, but I don't think that this book has a particular lead. But as far as the role that she played, I enjoyed her very much because she did everything she could at every turn to do right in the situation, to save people, to try to solve the problem in front of really odds that are impossible. The only thing that they could ever do is survive. They're not going to beat a bad guy. They're not going to find the cure. They're just going to escape having not died. And I think she did pretty well. I enjoyed reading. Her part of the story was always enjoyable for me, especially the second read through.
Sure. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm pretty much on board with Heather and Rick. I think that I like Cody a lot. I love that she was very competent, yet not all knowing. She was compassionate, yet not like didn't just break down in the middle of everything. Like she was a very kind of well-rounded character. And I think there could have been a danger to be the stoic doctor that just gets the experiment done, or the overly freaked out person that loses all their medical training, which is I hate when that happens in movies. Like these geniuses like lose all their intellect when stuff happens. So I think she was a great balance of that, and I think that in contrast to the younger kids that froze and couldn't know what was going on, and also to our guard who didn't have any emotion. I thought she was a nice balance for all of them to kind of feed off of, and she was kind of who she needed to be for each other member of the team. And I thought that made her a really unique role.
I should have mentioned before, and Eric, your comments remind me that she also handily dealt with the guards being like lascivious and gross to her,
Mm-hmm.
and making huge assumptions about why she was doing what she was doing and why she liked a man and why she didn't. And she was just like, no, I'm not going to deal with your ass. And I really like that too. Like, that's another cool thing in stories like this, is the people that you get introduced to before all hell breaks loose. Like, would you want them on your team? And I'd want Dr. Cody on my team.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I second that. Meg, do you want Dr. Cody on your team?
Definitely. Uh, I have to agree with Eric. Her being kind of very balanced and well-rounded. A strong character, but not like over the top in any area. Definitely a team player in that aspect. I want someone that is going to know what they're doing, but also can rely on others, to make things work, and is not all out for herself or anything like that. So,
Sure, sure. Um, all right, so we've touched on kind of the new characters that we were introduced to in this story, at least for about the first 100 pages or so. And then when we got to about page 100, we had something happen that I found to be hilarious, because we had kind of talked behind the scenes here at Youtini about how much Han Solo we'd been doing recently, with all of the books that came
Yeah.
out, surrounding Solo, a Star Wars story, and how much we talk up books like Paradise Snare and all those things. And lo and behold, I had no idea, but we're about 100 pages in, and who pops up but Han Solo and Chewbacca? And I imagine this hits you one of two ways. Either you were happy to see them, or maybe you weren't so happy to see them. What did you think about this, Rick? What did it do to bring in these well-known, big-time characters to this story that far into it?
Well, I have two answers. One is the 2009 answer when I read this the first time, and the other is the 2018 answer. The 2009 me was tickled because the book was a bit of a ride, and to me, it was like such a detour anyway. Even within the timeline of Star Wars books at the time, like they're like, what? They're really doing this? We're really doing the bloody stormtrooper helmet? We're doing full tilt horror. Um, and then Han Solo showed up, and of course, it's like comforting and funny, and he's characterized pretty well. So I liked that, and then I liked that he sort of helped to get them through the troubles. And, you get to use the guile and the wit of Han, and Chewie's brutality and strength to get through the danger. But reading in 2018, the book stops dead cold for me at page 100.
Oh no!
I'm like, all the danger is gone. I was like, they're not gonna kill Han Solo in this book, obviously, and obviously this takes place before amidst A New Hope or whatever. So I mean, he's not gonna die, but it really took the wind out of it for me, and I was like, I'm only a third of the way through, and everybody's safe now. Like, and now I know that the danger quotient for the other characters goes way up. Like, they're way more likely to not make it through.
Hmm.
Um, so for me, I thought it was a big negative on a reread
Okay.
because I was invested in Trig and Sartoris and Kale and everybody else. I wanted to see how they'd get through it, not how a Wookiee would help them.
Yeah, totally fair. Meg, what do you think?
Oh, um, did not like it. The only thing I could think about, like once they were introduced, was like, did they only put them in here to make it more Star Warsy? I could have done without, and I kind of thought when I was done with the book, I was like, this book would have been better without them. And I mean, they didn't really serve that much of a purpose to me, so no thanks.
Okay. So far, not too big of fans. Heather, what do you think?
Um, like Rick, I have two different versions of this ordeal. So, back when the book came out, I was super stoked to see Han and Chewie in the book because just I thought that seeing some familiar faces in this book was really cool, like a nice breath of fresh air. But now after my reread, I'm kind of thinking that whoever decided that they should be in there, I believe that they weren't confident that the book would still be good without them. And I think the story would have been better without them because it had enough Star Warsy elements. Just the fact that, there's a Star Destroyer, you have the troopers. I mean, you don't need these very well-known characters to make it Star Wars.
Hmm. Yeah, no, fair enough. Eric, are you kind of along the same lines?
Yo, I lost my mind when Han and Chewie showed up in the book. You're all wrong. It was so. I literally loved it so much. And I think it's because I am admittedly on such a Han high this year. I totally put that. But I was like, man, I've been thinking about Han. I've been playing as Han in Battlefront. I'm reading the Crispin trilogy. I'm like, just got Solo again. And I'm like, reading this book. And then I turn the page. And out of nowhere, Han Solo finds me again. And it was awesome. And I loved everything about it. And I really loved reading a story with Han and Chewie where they weren't the main people at all. Because I feel like the only time you really get to see people react to Han Solo in a vacuum is A New Hope. Because after that, everyone pretty much knows who he is for the most part. Or in other books, there's not at least as much mystery. But to see these like Cody and these kids react to Han as this prisoner who did something, and then they just kind of go through the story as just a Corellian and a scary ass Wookiee monster. I thought it was really cool and unique. So yeah, I fanboyed out. I loved it so hard.
I'm glad to see we had both ends of the spectrum here, and it's really interesting actually how reading this multiple times in different, when it came out in '09 and then reading it now, kind of changed how you guys viewed it. This was my first reading. I think everyone else's first reading. Um, and for me personally, to answer my own question, I just thought it was funny. Like I said, I thought it was so funny because it felt so random to me. I did not see it coming, and once they were there, I was okay with it. But I agree with you, Meg. I think that it was very much a let's make sure this feels Star Wars enough and put these guys in here. Um,
One thing that I didn't notice during my first read that I caught in my second
mhm.
was before we see Han and Chewie, when they first enter the Star Destroyer, in the hangar bay, they mentioned seeing a modified Corellian Corvette. And to me, that obviously means the Falcon, but I don't know if anyone else took it the same way because they didn't really do much with it. And why would the Falcon be on the Star Destroyer when Han and Chewie were already on the Purge? And then even after they escaped the Star Destroyer, I mean, that Corvette is just gone.
Hmm.
So I don't know if I was like wrong to assume that that was the Falcon. I just didn't know why else they would put that there, otherwise to hint that, Han was going to be coming up, but like the placement didn't seem to match.
Yeah.
I
I
never
feel like
caught that myself.
I feel like I didn't think that was because I remember what you were talking about, and I think I just assumed it was. I mean, Corellians make the most ships out of anyone in the galaxy for the most part, so I feel like either it might have been an intentional like double juke, like we're gonna make you think it's the Falcon, but of course it's not the Falcon. Han can't, so they're kind of using reverse psychology on you to make you really think Han's not there. Maybe,
I don't know.
who's to say?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good catch. No, I didn't actually even notice that myself. Um, but that's
May I just
interesting.
say, on the subject of Han Solo and his inclusion,
Yeah.
I don't think that at the tail end, because this would have been the tail end of the Legends thing. You're like in the last 3 or 4 years of what is now Legends. It wasn't Legends before, but they were experimenting a lot and trying different things with different authors at that time. And back then, none of the books did nearly as good a job as these new canon novels have done of making us care about characters that are technically completely tangential.
Hmm.
You know, to read a whole book and to care about the people, the characters in Lost Stars the way we do, and hold them in as high esteem as, certain cinematic characters, that didn't really happen with the books back then. I mean, maybe with your, sorry, Corey, with your Koran horns and your rogue squadrons and things like that, you might care. But there weren't a lot of people like, and their names escape me because I have to remember them now. Some fan I am, but like the main character of Inferno Squad,
Iden
um,
Versio.
Yeah.
Versio. I care about her a lot, and I think of her in the same manner I would other characters at this point. But that didn't really happen with the Legends books back then. I don't. I mean, you were reading them back then, Heather. I mean, would you agree with that at all? Like,
Um,
I
I
feel like
think
they
it
had to use Han
depended
as a
on the
crutch.
book. Like, certain books like Darth Bane, I mean, I really did care about Darth Bane and Darth Xana,
That's
but
true.
some other books that I've read, yeah, the characters didn't really stick with me, and the proof is I can't name any right now.
And I should clarify too. The way back eras like the Dawn of the Jedi, the Knights Republic, that doesn't really fall into because those are pretty self-contained. So I'm
Mhm.
50% wrong there. I guess when it comes to the era in which the original characters, legacy characters, were alive.
I
So
see what you're saying.
it's like in the OT era, the novels, there was no novel with that was really great that had characters that were completely independent of Han, Leia, and Luke, where they made no appearances. Pretty rare.
Yeah.
So I think back then it was just sort of like, well, it's in the OT. They're gonna come through no matter what you do. But
Right.
nowadays, with the new canon books being so OT character light, um, it's just a different world. So I don't know. It's hard to criticize Death Troopers for that, really. Now that I think about
Sure. Sure. Um, So, you guys are bringing up some great points. I want to ask you a few questions, though, about the actual structure of this book. We normally talk about structure at least a little bit. Recently, there have been a lot of the flashback or multiple timeline type of books. This book was different, I think, than things that I've read recently and overall, for one big reason, and that was very short chapter lengths. Overall, I mean, there were some chapters that were as short as like 4 pages or so. And there were quite a few before you could get towards the end of this book. What did that do? Was that something that worked better for Star Wars overall, just for a horror book? What did you like it? I mean, what did the short chapter lengths do for you guys? Eric, let's start with you this time.
I really liked the short chapter lengths because for my reading habits, I read a lot at work. I read a lot in short bursts. So I don't really get the 2 to 3 hours to just sit and kind of read through. So it just practically was very easy for me to read a chapter, go to something else, read 2 or 3 chapters, something else. And there's that little endorphin rush I think that most readers get when you finish a chapter because you're like, oh, I did it, like, and it just gives you a nice little boost to go to the next one. And this book just kind of gave you boost, 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 and it kind of followed the adrenaline of the characters that were going, 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 going. So I feel like even though chapters can be pretty arbitrary sometimes, but I think that just the formatting of the book kind of gave me the energy to keep going, and also just practically made it easier for me to read based on my personal reading style. So I liked it a lot.
All right. Heather,
Um, I I really liked the short chapters because when the characters were all still separated, haven't met yet, whenever a certain time frame would happen, the short chapters allowed us to immediately get the reactions of each set of characters right away, as opposed to going through a whole long chapter with these characters dealing with the situation and then the next chapter dealing with another set of characters, but the time starting when the previous chapter started, kind of like starting over, but with the other set of characters. But here, instead, whenever something would happen, like here you get to see Kaelin Trigg. Okay, here is Dr. Cody. Here is Sartoris. Like everything is way more immediate. Now, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead. What I did not like were the chapter titles. Um, I think the chapter titles kind of took away from me just figuring things out myself. One in particular, when Dr. Cody went down to get Han and Chewie, and there were bodies everywhere as she was going down to get them, and then they come back and all the bodies were gone. I mean, clearly there was no one around to just pick up all of the bodies and take them away. And we know going into it that it's a zombie movie, whether it be your first time reading it or not. um, we can assume as the reader that, okay, they got up and left, right? And the title for the next chapter is They Woke Up. Okay, thanks. You know, like I didn't really need that. So there's the good and bad.
sure, sure. I think for me, most of the time I was wondering, like, how the heck is this phrase going to come into play in this chapter, specifically chapter two, which was called Meat Nest. I was
Yeah.
very confused.
Great
Um,
band name too.
yeah,
It makes you try to anticipate things rather than
it
just
it
going along for
does.
the ride.
It does.
Sure.
Absolutely. Uh, Meg, what do you think about the short chapters? Do they work for you?
Definitely. I think with this book specifically, like it's important to kind of keep the reader going, and you want it to be a page turner, especially in the beginning before a lot of stuff is happening. In the short chapters, like you finish one and you're like, oh, maybe I'll just do one more,
Mhm.
and it's a lot easier to do over and over and over again if they're very short. So, I mean, for me, just in general, chapter length doesn't really matter that much, but I think for this kind of book, how it was set up, and how it kind of progresses, I think it was effective and good. And not I the titles didn't really do it for me, but the length was pretty good.
Sure. Yeah. Rick, what do you think?
A lot of how I feel about it is has been echoed in the previous comments. I think a story of this type, it must be propulsive, and a great way to do that is with short chapters. And hardly, especially in the beginning, the chapters don't ever feature the other characters. Sartoris doesn't, like, if Sartoris is in chapter X, he's not in the next one,
Mhm.
and it swaps from character to character over and over, pushing you towards these big moments. You know, when they finally wake up, when Han and Chewie are discovered. You get the discovery of Han and Chewie, and then you're robbed of it, something else, and you come back. And provided that the story is engaging, which a lot of the time this story is, and my compliments to Joe Schreiber for that. It's sort of like being on a roller coaster for a while, and then you just drop, and the drop is fun when all hell breaks loose, and then if everything is bite sized and you get a lot of action from the left and the right and all these perspectives. That to me is a lot of fun. So I think the short chapters are almost a necessity for a story like this. Like I don't want a Troy Denning Legacy of the Force chapter where it's like 27 pages of
Mhm.
something. It's like, and I have this compulsion. I can't put a book down in the middle of a chapter. So if it's 30 pages, I'm reading every page by the time I get to the end.
Mhm.
So for me, this is also, like Eric said, a very convenient book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I agree with what you and kind of what Samuel said about if I'm reading and I can say, oh, I'll do one more chapter, but if I see it's a 17 or 20-page chapter, I'll be like, well, I guess I'll stop early, instead
Yeah,
of going on
I'll just
more.
bow
So,
out.
all psychological warfare there.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, and I mean, in today's day and age where we all have the attention span of a goldfish, and we're scrolling through our Facebook feeds, and we're not entertained for three
Millennial.
seconds, so we hop over to Instagram. It works very well from that point of view. But also, think back to the origin of Star Wars and George Lucas, and his mantra, even directing, was always faster, more intense, faster, more intense, and that this book does that in absolute leaps and bounds. So. I thought it worked really well for horror, but I think it serves Star Wars well in general because it is supposed to be a very upbeat, fun story. There really aren't that many, downbeats, at least in the original films. Um, so we're about halfway through this panel, maybe a little bit over. I want to get to some heavy hitting questions right now. All right, we need to knock some of these things out. All
Is
right,
this a
yeah.
Alright.
So
test?
stretch if you
Was I
need
supposed,
to
was I
here.
supposed to have
Oh,
read this?
Yeah, more than the Wikipedia page,
yeah,
please.
Wikipedia has been expended and moving on. All right,
No, so
let's do it.
so one thing that you're constantly asking yourself in any of these horror films or zombie films really is who is going to survive, who is going to die, and how so specifically. So I'd like to go around one at a time and tell me, did everyone survive who you expected to, or did some of these deaths surprise you? And along that same vein, what was your most surprising or favorite death in this story? And I think I'm going to come to you first, Eric. What do you think?
I think I was surprised. I don't know if I was surprised by the deaths because I generally don't try to think ahead with entertainment nowadays, especially like I really thrive off of the twist culture. Like I even the most obvious twist in a movie, I'll try not to think about so I can have that moment that the writers intend. So I it's pretty easy for me to be surprised by deaths. So I guess I'm gonna kind of like weasel out of the first question to say the second question. Kale was probably my most hit me the hardest because I think just the work that Schreiber did to really establish the brother connection throughout um, was really impactful. So then for Trig, when we got the silhouette of the brother's head, and I'm like, we all know that his face is gone, and Trig does not. Like that moment of like, oh my god, it's this little kid's world is about to be destroyed. I know it as a viewer. I want to tell him before he finds out, and I couldn't. And that was, I think, a beautifully horrible moment, which is an aesthetic that I love. And so I think that this kid who we were rooting for the entire time, to see his face literally get blown off and have his after he almost died so many other times, and then for his little brother to finally just be in that shock for almost the rest of the book, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a tough one. Meg, what do you think?
Um, from the beginning, I knew one of the brothers had to go. Just because it was, very well set up that, we're here to protect each other. We're here for each other. We're always going to be here for each other. Obviously not. um, so
Ouch.
yeah, so I knew that had to happen. Uh, you know what? That stupid Wookiee baby is like has been sticking with me ever since I read
Yeah.
this. Um,
Yeah.
so that
I feel bad. I don't remember that.
kind of
Well, I
like
do now, but
well, like I guess technically he kind of died like twice. So it was like it was horrible the first time, and then the second time I was like, you know what? Fine, whatever.
I mean, Wookiees dying just gets all the Star Wars fan base because we met one for like 40 years and we loved him, and now they're like, they died.
Just want to say that that type of death, if that were a human baby in a normal story, like that would be disgusting,
Yeah.
and you would
Yeah.
never do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably one of the most, maybe the most horrific thing in the whole book. Like, what is all Chewie is about is family.
Mm-hmm.
That's all he cares about is family and his people. And could you like, ugh, but baby, ugh.
it's
Yeah.
okay. They're not real people.
Uh,
I'm just kidding.
Hold on, Heather. Seriously?
No,
Why didn't you
no.
guys? Why didn't any of you
All
tell
fiction.
me?
So weird. Oh my god, we missed it. We missed it.
So Rick, was that the most surprising, upsetting one for you as well, or what did you think about that?
No, Eric, my Youtini soulmate, took mine. I'm an absolute sucker for stories. Like, if you've seen one story, you've seen them all, and if you really pay attention, most stories are predictable. So I try really hard to ignore any kind of setup. Like, yeah, one of the brothers have to die. Like, I knew that the older brother was going to die because the first brother we meet is the younger one. That's how it works in stories. And for the younger brother to really, you know, stand tall and become who he's supposed to be throughout the story, well, he's got to lose some stuff. How Star Wars works. So I was actually really struck by Kale's death because this sort of wisecracking sage, he was permanent to me. Like, well, they lost their dad. He's not going to lose his brother. But I don't have much more to add to that than Eric did. That hurt me pretty bad, even though you could see it coming from a million miles away. I didn't think the droid Waste deserved to die. He was a very capable droid, and he's a 2-1B, so it's not like he's going to keep up running through the hallways with them. But I thought that was kind of BS.
Yeah,
What a waste.
yeah, and
What a-
interesting.
This panel is over.
That's all, guys. Join us next time.
Yeah. Eric waited 48 minutes to do that.
Fine, it's a long game.
All right, and Heather, what'd you think?
You know, since I read this back in the day, I already knew who was going to die, so and it's hard for me to remember back then reading it being surprised at certain deaths, but one thing that is different this time around, and this might show you guys a little about how messed up I might be, but the way Kale died, for some reason I remembered it totally different. For some reason I remembered like vividly in my head that Trig found out that Kale died when Trig was like running down this hallway and the vent above him pops open and Kale kind of like flops down halfway with his eyeball like hanging out of his socket like through his eye string. And I remember that so vividly in my head all these years, and come to find out that's not even how it happened. And I'm like, why did I think that all these
Is
years?
that someone you murdered, Heather?
Shh,
I was
this
just gonna
stays
say that-
here.
Horrible memory.
Eric is asking the real questions.
Yeah, and also from a medical standpoint, eye string is my favorite thing that I heard today.
I don't. What do you call it? What's the
eye
actual
string? That would be his optic nerve. But
optic nerve? Eye string is better.
to get back to Kale, I have to agree with you guys. Most of y'all are saying Kale, and I think what was so upsetting for me was actually how surprising it was, because it wasn't like it was something that you necessarily saw coming, or I guess I didn't. It was Dr. Cody was doing so much to save him, and he was just having all these horrible things, happen to him. He's getting his leg cut off. I was like, oh, he's already had a limb, chopped off. He can't have anything else happen. And then she's dragging him away, and you're like, she's almost there, she's almost there, she's almost there. And then all of a sudden, he's shot in the head. I mean, it was just so out of nowhere. It really got me. So I'm with you guys. I'm reliving it right now. I'm scarred. Okay, and so how about the scariest moment of the entire book for you? Because that's what this was. It was trying to strike a chord in us. It was trying to freak us out, and there are plenty to choose from. But what for you was just the scariest thing that you were seeing in your head while you were reading this or listening to it if you did the audiobook? Meg, let's start with you this time.
Wookie baby.
Still Wiki.
Oh, Wookie baby. I mean, the first time when they're trying to rescue him or say like, hey, come on with us, and he's like, no, I'm just gonna hug my family who's no longer alive, and you're like, okay, that's sweet. Okay, goodbye. No, he's definitely like getting eaten alive, and yeah, no thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why that stuck with me, and if that was like, I read the book, but if we were like actually like seeing that like it was part of a movie, off screen or whatever, still that would be horrible. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Rick, scariest moment for you?
There's nothing I like more in a story than when hope comes to the forefront. You think, oh yeah, they're gonna figure it out. We're gonna turn this around, and then hope gets taken away. Um,
Hmm.
in a convenient bit of, plot contrivance, Dr. Cody gets to use the antivirus for a moment. So she injects this. I forget if it was like a stormtrooper or whatever the being was, and for 2 seconds it works long enough to give her the information she needs to find out about the virus. But I thought, okay, cool, they're turning things around, antivirus, and it only stays human for like 10 seconds and then goes back to being a murderous monster.
Oh.
That gutted me. And that always freaks me out because you think, okay, they'll get a handle on it, they'll progress, they're going to be somewhat safer, but no, there's no hope. And as I said earlier, all they can do is escape, and they're not going to, they're going to lose a lot along the way. So that for me is the scariest part, is the hope of an actual change or progression to get taken away.
Yeah. Heather, what do you think?
Well, there are so many, it's hard to choose,
It is.
but one of them was something that didn't even really happen earlier on in the story when Sartoris was in his cabin, having that dream. In his dream, it was something about like he finds a map of something in his arm, and he like peels back his skin and reaches in
Oh,
trying to
yeah.
get the diagram. That like you know self-mutilation like that, it kind of like freaks me out. And even though it was just in a dream, I just really cringed during that part.
Yeah, no, great choice. That was very disturbing. Eric, what do you have to add to that?
Heather is correct.
That
I mean, like that was my moment. I had to put the book down. I was because it was written again. Props to Joe Schreiber here. The detail in which the peeling of the skin and going into the muscle and the bone was described was so disgustingly visceral. I was so uncomfortable and it was yeah, that was it.
yeah.
Joe, if
It was
you're
the worst.
watching, you're really good at making people throw up, so props to you.
It was the most disgusting thing I've
That
ever
was my
smelled.
next question. How many times did you puke while reading this book? No, for me, honestly, and it's interesting that we're choosing things that you might not necessarily think we would choose in a zombie story, if you will. My moment was actually the like emaciated soldiers that were hiding
Oh
in the
yeah.
ship in the hangar, who had basically eaten some of the other members of their group. I think like
Ugh.
the extent that normal people, not even the monsters, were going to, and what they were willing to do in that situation was just so monstrous to me that affected me very deeply.
And the way they
Um,
reasoned it out with logic, like, no, 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 like we picked who would go. Like it was such a calm
yeah.
description of
It was very
cannibalism.
efficient. I respect that.
Yeah. See?
Another window.
Oh man.
And I'm a little more worried. Next.
If Heather's stream just disconnects, it was not me, and it was not because I was freaked out. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this overall. This is Star Wars does, a genre for the first time. Do you like Star Wars doing a genre? Is there another genre besides horror that you would like to see done, or that you think you have seen done? If you'd like to bring any other books into this discussion, Eric, what do you think?
I really dig it. Possibly my one of my favorite Legends books is Kenobi, which is just a western in Star Wars. It's go buy it, John Jackson Miller. Get it right now, or in your next Youtini box. But so yeah, I think that and this kind of show what genre can do very well. Um, I don't know if I really want such. I mean, Star Wars has so many genres in it, like it is a sci-fi, but also there's crime capers to it. Like Rogue One, is a lot of it is stealing stuff, and it's a squad going in for an Ocean's 11 style
Stealth
plot near the
Squad.
end of it. Yeah, Stealth Squad. Watch the RPG show. Um, so yeah, I think I'm cool with Star Wars going in if they do it well. But really, I just want more Western. So if we can get on that, that'd be great.
God. Yeah, I know at a certain point, Charles, you're going to call on me, but just get me because once again, Eric has taken my answer. Westerns is one of my favorite genres, and Star Wars, the original Star Wars, has a lot of Western in it, anyways. But I would love to see more straight up Westerns, and I always did, and then I got it in Kenobi. I mean, Kenobi is just. I know we're not here to talk about Kenobi, folks, but if you haven't read Kenobi, put Kenobi on your pull for your next Youtini box, and
So
Death
good.
Troopers, but really do Kenobi.
Duly noted. Meg, what do you think? Did you enjoy Star Wars doing a genre?
I did. I think it was really well done in this case, and I think if it's well done, in any genre that they might try, I'm all for it. Um, I kind of saw like Lost Stars, for example, as like a Star Wars romance. I wouldn't mind more of that personally.
Hmm.
But like, they can. Star Wars is such a big. I mean, they're going to keep. Hopefully, they're going to keep publishing more books, and so like they, if they want to focus on, more westerns or more romances or anything like that, go for it. Try anything, I guess. I'll buy it.
Sure, yeah. Heather?
I would love it if authors would test the waters a bit more with these different genres because I really did enjoy like this book, a Star Wars horror novel. I mean, I never imagined that would become a thing, but it happened and I loved it and I would read another one in the horror genre. Probably if it weren't zombies, because this already followed very closely with other zombie stories, and I feel like another one wouldn't be much different. But like I'm with Meg, Lost Stars as a romance novel, especially some parts get really saucy. It's a good bath time book.
Hmm.
But it's funny that I've
You're
never read
down.
Kenobi. I should really pick that up next.
Yeah.
It's funny that you say Kenobi is more of a Western style because even though I haven't read that book, I was thinking that Solo kind of was in a
Oh
way.
yeah.
I don't know
Hmm.
if that's just me, but yeah,
Hmm.
I would like
Definitely,
to see more different kinds.
Heather, that is totally true. Solo is very much a Western, but Kenobi is, I mean, if you just subbed out Obi-Wan Kenobi for a cowboy, it's that much of a Western. It's a lone drifter coming into the town to change the lives of everyone who is stuck in their rut. Like, if you put Kenobi on a horse and gave him a 10-gallon hat, it's that much of a
And
Western.
he's almost on a horse. Like he has
The Opie, Eopie
the
Opie, or whatever
Yopi.
it's called.
And also for fun, if you haven't read, last thing I'll say about Kenobi, I swear to God,
I don't promise.
the main woman, what's her name? Rick, do you remember?
Now that you've asked, I can't
I
remember
know.
it.
So the main woman, she's great. If you're reading it, just imagine her Jessica Chastain. That's what I did. Makes the book really great.
Oh, that's perfect.
She'd be so good.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to do a Kenobi roundtable at some point. It'll just be
Yes.
me and Eric smiling at each other for 2 hours.
It's good.
But Heather, you got to read Red Harvest.
So do I.
Yeah, is that one still kind of zombie-ish?
Yeah.
I believe it goes back to the very roots of whatever the virus is. There aren't zombies. It's like, to me, it's almost like Little Shop of Horrors because I think there's an evil plant that talks. I think
So is it like actually tied to this novel, or it's a separate
Yes.
kind of
it is
virus?
tied
It
to
is
this
tied?
novel, but it takes place in the Old Republic era.
But it is a
Oh,
prequel, yeah. It is a direct
Amazing.
wow.
prequel.
Okay, yeah, I do need to read that then. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And just as a little plug for Joe Schreiber himself, his third book, um, Mall Lockdown, was like a 70s exploitation prison movie about like the sizzling
Oh.
lives of prisoners,
Hmm.
Hmm.
and Darth
That
Maul
sounds
busts in.
awesome.
It's like a Escape from New York meets like Caged Heat with Darth Maul. It's good stuff. I mean,
Wow.
Joe Schreiber's a really good genre guy.
So yes, give us more of all of this. Is what we're saying.
I
The
know,
new-
yeah.
Let's
So
go, Del Rey. I want more.
So it sounds like everyone here, thought this was good. It was effective as a as Star Wars story, I guess. Rick, specifically to come back to you because you're our resident horror expert. How effective was this as a horror story? If you took the Star Wars out of it and just looked at it as horror, how did it do?
I mean, for me, it ticked all the boxes. It was incredibly gory. It had average people, within the context of their world up against incredible odds, and it was gross. Like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, and Joe Schreiber can turn a phrase. Some of the things that he says to paint the picture of grossness is great. I mean, I think we might actually be talking about this on purpose at some point here, but like the chorus of singing lungs. I mean, I've never actually forgotten about that. Like outside of my love for Star Wars, when I think of stories that I've read, that's stuck. That's gross. So yes, very memorable, very good gore, characters in extreme situations. I thought it was a very good horror story. And for me, the Star Wars parts of it were the most minor. I just was tickled to see all this carnage happening on a Star Destroyer. Like that's like cake, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
thought it was a really successful Star Wars story. Just for full disclosure, I had mentioned before we got on that I was like, I don't know if I actually like this book, but I hear myself talking about it. I think I do. I was ready to be like, this book was not great. But I'm wrong. I lied to myself.
It's fun to have that realization live. Sometimes just that's what's so fun about Youtini as a whole. The more I talk to you guys, different books, the more I find I like them. Because you're like,
Yeah,
oh yeah, once I talk about it, I do know a lot. and,
yeah, I really enjoyed
Yeah.
it.
And that's one of my favorite things about these roundtables is hearing the numbers at the beginning and at the end and seeing like this actually really does affect how you view the book. That's really interesting. So, we just mentioned Red Harvest. Uh, there are other, attempts at Star Wars doing horror films. Some of them are going to be in the comics. So, like most recently, the Tales from Vader's Castle comic series just started. That it was really meant to be sort of a Halloween time, horror type film. There's also, if you go back to the Star Wars main comic, the Screaming Citadel arc, where it was almost the
yeah.
vampire type main character, with the parasites that would control your mind. And then even all the way to the Clone Wars TV show with the brain invaders episodes that they had with the
Yeah.
worms that would be in your nose and control your brain.
Oh,
I mean, there have been quite a few attempts. How does this stack up compared to the other things? What is your favorite Star Wars horror? Is it this? Was it one of those other things? Is it something that I didn't even mention? Meg, let's start with you this time.
So, this definitely doesn't compare to like all the horror type Star Wars things that you mentioned, but the first Star Wars books that I ever read were the Galaxy of Fear series, which is like a young reader thing that I
Cool.
read
Yeah,
when I was a young reader. So obviously not like terrifying as like compared to like Death Troopers, but I just remember that being like it was the right kind of um, thing for someone just starting to read a Star Wars book to kind of be like, oh, they can do this with Star Wars. It's not all just like, the original trilogy, like adventures and things like that. It's like, oh, there can be like terrifying, horrible, scary things. I remember liking that. I haven't, read them for a long time, but that always comes to mind for me.
sure, sure. Heather, let's come to you next.
Well, first, I need to take this off. It's getting too hot for this. I was trying to do a bit, but man, I live in California, so okay.
Sorry.
So, I guess the only other type of Star Wars horror that I've consumed would be the Brain Invaders arc in Clone Wars, and that came out just like a couple months after this book did, and I love them both. I think equally even. They're both really great, and they're both even pretty similar with the troopers going about all zombified, killing people, but. Yeah, it's really hard to choose, so I just say I love them both.
Sure. Yeah, Rick, what do you think?
Sorry, I had to get up there. My dog trying to murder somebody, and figures that something scary is going on downstairs right now. Talking about this book. Let me
The
know if something
dog is
comes up
barking,
behind
and
me.
you went to go check it out alone. Did you learn
I know.
nothing from all these horror
Rick,
films
don't
that
look
you've
now, but there's something behind you.
Vintage collection figures. I'm a family man. I have to run for it. For me, I would, all the things that you mentioned follow Death Troopers. I have to hand it to them. I think this was the original experiment for going with strict horror. So for me, I remember this the most fondly because it's on purpose. It's not like it's just using parts of the genre, like the Brain Invaders. That's like your classic Invasion of the Body Snatchers type story. Your classic. It's like the thing that invades your mind and takes over or mutates your body. I
right.
still like Death Troopers the most. I mean, it turns out a book that I thought I didn't like is one of my favorite Star Wars books of all time, apparently. But I think it functions so well as a horror story. And as far as Star Wars horror, this was really the first major work, and I think it's still the most successful.
I'm glad we got to share this revelation with you.
I
Yeah.
know. I feel like you guys had an intervention. Like, Rick, you thought something and you were wrong.
All right, Eric, favorite Star Wars horror?
I think I'm gonna give it to Death Troopers as well. Because it's such a pure example of the genre. I mean, also it has the advantage of being a full-length book. I mean, it is a long. I spent more hours with it than I would have just with a movie or a TV show episode, for sure. But I also think, thinking back on it, Star Wars horror goes back, I mean, to Empire, to the cave. I mean, that to me is like surrealist horror, is going into a dark place and a monster appears out of nowhere, and then there's an explosion and you are confused and terrified and you don't know what's happening, and then when Luke finds himself on the helmet, then it becomes more. But that moment to me as a kid was like horrifying. And the end of Rogue One, people talk about that being Vader's monster movie, you know? So I think that, Rick, you put it very well. Like, Star Wars flirts with horror a lot. Like, it inputs horror in a lot of places. But as far as, you know, overall complete package horror, I think Death Troopers reign supreme.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, and I'd put Death Troopers right at the top as well. So I am with you guys there. Now, we are running a bit short on time, but there are a couple of plot points that I really want to get to. Rick, you alluded to one of them earlier. So I will come to you first because you, again, are our expert. What in the
I'm
world was
saying
going on with the giant vat of screaming lungs? They were introduced relatively early, and then I just feel like they never came back, but it was so disturbing. It felt to me very much like Joe Schreiber was just like, "Oh, I have to put this in here because I thought this up." But what was going on?
Well, I think it had to do with whatever the experiment was with Blackwing, whatever the virus was, because clearly those things are all sentient. And I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I might be off on the internal science of the zombies, but were they not of all one mind, right? They were like a hive creation, or were they individual zombies? I don't remember.
Well, they had to communicate with each other
Yeah,
across the ship. But so I think it was like they weren't necessarily all plugged in hive mind like some other horror movies, but I think they were trying to get to that point because they were learning and evolving. So I think they would have
so
eventually gotten there for
then
sure.
then I think the lungs were a part of the experiment. I think even creepier was the POV character for that. He was an artist. I want to call him
Hmm.
Armitage, but he's a creeper too. Talking about how all of his art school experience and how he likes this and he likes that. And it's like when he saw the nervous system laid out with the lungs, he had to draw it. It's like, all right, Freakazoid, I don't want to be alone with you in
Yeah.
this lab anymore.
Yeah.
It creeped the hell out of me. The lungs are a great image, though. I don't know if you guys ever watched the TV show Hannibal.
I
Um,
haven't yet, but God, the things
it's
I've heard about it.
disgusting and very, very graphic. And I feel like I marry up the images I saw on that show with some of the images that are in this book. Because when I think about it, I think I'm seeing Hannibal, but I'm also thinking of the movie Aliens as well, where they see the face huggers in the glass and Paul Reiser, tries to get into the glass or whatever. But um, the lungs are just one of those things that you do in a horror movie to unsettle your audience. Like it's so gross and disquieting. Like whatever you're reading next, you're just thinking about the screeching, yelling lungs. And if you did do the audio book, they fully produced that moment. Like these things
Oh.
screech and yell at you in a chorus, and it's
Oh my god.
Oh man.
it's funny. Uh, Heather, you would hate the chapter titles in the audiobook because it's like chapter 22, lung windows, and then
Oh my god,
someone's like,
no.
but then someone's like lung windows, lung windows, and every time I
No!
listened to a chapter, I was like Heather's never gonna listen to this audiobook
No, I'm
because it
not. That
repeats
is
it like
so
3 times in a
dorky.
row. I know it's not great, but it's not terrible. And they also use prequel era music, which is weird. It doesn't fit.
Huh.
That is weird.
That's really interesting.
Just Duel of the Fates for 7 hours.
I would
It's
not
like
complain.
inappropriate.
I love that
It's like
song.
inappropriate uses of the Force theme, like Trig
Yeah,
is
'cause
thinking
there's
about his
no
dad
bearing in
dying,
this
and it's
book.
like da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You're like, this is for Luke. What are we doing?
Uh,
Oh man. Okay. Any other thoughts on the lungs? I'm just gonna open the floor to everybody.
no, yeah, they're gross.
They
Dear
were
God.
they were
You're
I just
fine,
disgusting.
figured they
Schreiber, you're
needed a
fine.
reason to, like, put the virus in the story somehow.
Okay.
A lot of this, like, it's a great story, but I feel like a lot of factors in this book just are just tools for making it into a horror story.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
this story more so than most Star Wars stories, it doesn't necessarily have to make a whole bunch of sense. It just has to really freak you out, and it definitely accomplished that.
Yeah.
So my other question, we're talking about these zombies and the virus that makes them, and I thought it was really interesting how at the end of the book, sort of all the zombies stopped being able to have their hive mind mentality whenever they left the Star Destroyer in the Purge, right? All of their ships kind of started just flying off aimlessly because you found out they had to have basically constant exposure to the virus to maintain the zombie state that they were in. My question is this: did Dr. Cody make a horrible, horrible mistake by taking this letter written by the guy that she found that was dead? That he had written this letter to his family, and she took this to another world and gave it to his family in a sentimental gesture. But did she not also just potentially carry the virus to this new planet so that it can now run rampant? The floor is open to everyone on this question. Anyone can weigh in.
I think they just needed a nice way to tie up the story so that it doesn't just end on like, okay, they escape. That's it. Like
Okay.
just some closure. I don't think you're supposed to like look too far into it because I mean, in that sense, wouldn't it be bad for any survivors to make it onto any planet?
Yes. Yes, it would.
But I think you're onto something though, Charles. Where I don't think that's the intent. But if this was a movie, right, the last shot of the movie would absolutely be, oh, they're talking, reminiscing, and then the camera would slowly pan down into the
Would be
letter,
the
Oh,
bum, bum,
yeah.
and it would be, but blackout. Like that's absolutely
Yeah.
how the movie ends. Like I don't think that's the intent, but oh yeah, I see it.
Dr. Cody done effed up.
And that's the last line of dialogue.
Yeah, no, I know it's been 9 years, but Joe Schreiber, if you're listening, I fully expect there to be a sequel to Death Troopers that starts right there on that planet, and now an entire planet is affected rather than just the ship. So we're really running low on time here. I do want to ask you guys, Eric. I'll come to you first because you actually brought this to my attention. I thought it was really interesting. We talk a lot here at Youtini about legends versus canon, and does this fit in the official storyline or not? And with this book, I think more so than many others, because it was such a horror, uh, you know, just genuine horror experience, horror story, we didn't ask so much, is this part of the official storyline? But could it be? I think is the interesting question that you brought up, because nothing necessarily happened that couldn't be undone. Were those your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I love that theory about legends. So one of my first articles for the site was all based around that if nothing in canon directly contradicts a legends book, it can totally still happen. So I think that as far as the only real thing that connects to canon in this is Han and Chewie existing, nothing really happens to either of them that directly contradicts canon, as much as I could tell. So I love the idea that this totally happened, before New Hope. So sure, why not? I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right, Rick, did you have a thought on that?
Ever since I read this book the first time, I think of Han Solo sitting on the trains, and he's like, "Kid, I've flown from one side of the galaxy to the next. I've seen a lot of strange things, but nothing that would make me think that there's one all-powerful thing controlling my destiny." I suppose if you lived through the Purge, you'd be like, "There is no God. There is nothing, there is nothing keeping all of us afloat or safe."
The Force
or
didn't
guiding
save
us.
me from the zombies that were eating my friends. So
Yeah.
Exactly. I feel like this book, like so many other stories, is just one of those weird things that Han saw, so he just doesn't have to talk about it. He can just whizzle wazzle, dismissive. It's all
Yeah.
all these stories are just in Han's back pocket.
yeah, like if they ever really want to go, like, oh come on, Han, how bad was it? And he goes, all right, so this one time, sit down, kid. Listen, I know your womp rats are big. Here's the thing about zombies.
Okay, Meg, in your mind, did this story happen? Could this still have happened?
Definitely. I think about this story the same way I think about Darth Plagueis, the Legends book. There's no reason why it can't technically be canon because, I mean, in my mind, it happened. So if it doesn't, if nothing in it specifically is like, this didn't actually happen in canon, then I mean, why not?
Yeah. Heather, what do you think?
As far as the timeline goes, I think it definitely fits. But I would think that an incident like this would make Han a bit more hardened. Like he's seen some stuff and he would be a bit more cold, but he still has like that playful attitude in the original trilogy. But I really do think this incident would back up the fact that he doesn't believe in the Force because everything that I've seen in Solo doesn't really back that up for me. But I mean, living through this would definitely do it.
He's like,
Sure.
man, I thought Kira hurt me. These zombies. Jeez Louise. Right, Chewie? Woo.
Okay, guys. So this has been a lot of fun. I want to bring this to a close, kind of the same way that we normally do. Uh, you'll have a couple of minutes to yourself to bring up anything that you didn't get to talk about that you think was really important for you in reading this book. Any final thoughts that you have, and what I also want to hear is re-rate the book 1 to 10. And if it has changed from when you originally rated the book at the beginning of this roundtable, let me know why it has changed. All right. So to start this off, Heather, let's come to you first.
Um, there's one thing that's been in the back of my mind that I've been wanting to get off my chest. I don't know if I'm the only one who's noticed it. So, like Rick has been saying, this story sticks very closely to the typical zombie tropes, but it kind of seems like when both Kale and Sartoris were bit, they instantly knew that, death was upon them, even though prior to this, they didn't know about that they had no knowledge of any kind of virus like this. They didn't know what zombies were, and as far as they knew, they were immune because they weren't affected by whatever was in the air. So how did they know that they were doomed when they got bit? It's kind of like the story was following too closely to these tropes that these characters would just assume what we assume about zombies.
It's a really good point. I never considered that.
Yeah, no, I had
I
neither.
hope I didn't ruin it for you.
No, but you're right. The characters
Devil's
definitely have seen
advocate,
zombie
I
movies.
think I think Schreiber actually, for me, dealt with that particular thing because I think the immunity itself dealt with the airborne nature of it. So they couldn't do it. But the way he wrote about what it felt like in the blood when they got bit, about like I could feel it in me, I could feel it screaming at me, I could feel it going up my legs. So I'm like, cut off my leg, cut off my leg, cut off my leg. Like
Mhm.
I
So it was like an
immediately,
instinct.
yeah, I thought they could literally feel it growing up their body, and they're like, this is gonna take me because I can feel it killing me in the
I can
moment.
accept that, yeah.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Es- especially what that antivirus did to Chewie's mind, which is also one of the most horrifying parts of the book. Like, the virus seems to have a very visceral effect once it's in you, and you can really tell what's gonna happen.
Yeah, yeah. Heather, re-rate the book for me before we move on.
Oh yeah. Um, I'm going to keep it at a 7 because I definitely don't want it in the 6 range because I don't see this as just an average book. I had a lot of fun with it, but I also don't want to rate it too high. So yeah, I'm going to stay with my 7.
Okay, fair enough. Meg, let's come to you. Final thoughts and re-rate the book.
I enjoyed it. I'm glad that I took the time to read it because I knew it would be different and not really like anything else that I'd read in Star Wars land. Um, I don't think I would have picked it up if it wasn't a Star Wars book. It's just not really like anything that I would gravitate toward normally. But for what it was, I thought it was pretty good. I'm still gonna stick with my 6 out of 10 though. Yeah.
All right, all right. Rick, what about you?
Um, I said 5, and that just seems totally wrong because I enjoyed it so much. I'm gonna go with a 7, like a high 7, a 7.9, 7.8, almost an 8.
Wow. Okay.
All just because I'm realizing so much more of what I did enjoy, and I think I got really hung up on Han being a part of it the second time. It really annoyed me. So it's like, oh, we're spending more. I know Han. Read a lot of Han books, seen a lot of Han, and then blah blah blah.
It was weird timing.
Yeah,
It was.
but you know, this is the kind of book that, frankly, I don't think we're going to see any more of. Not in Disney Wars. I don't think there's a place for it. It's easy to forget that in 2009, the idea that there would ever be any more Star Wars films, it was just a non-issue. There was never going to happen, ever, ever, ever. So that's when the sort of freewheeling nature of the books took over. You started seeing very weird concepts pop up in these books. So for me, I guess, you know, the book will always hold a special place because it came from a very fertile time. Maybe not the biggest, not maybe not the most successful experiment for a Star Wars book, but I don't. I mean, I have to give it props because I don't think there's a place for it anymore. I don't think we're not going to see a Death Troopers 2, until Disney
Basically, you're
decides to
glad it
stop making.
happened.
Yeah, like, and as I've said about Star Wars in general, how many cool properties that you love outside of like Star Wars or Star Trek, and it's more in vogue to do it now because it's marketable. But to have this much good Star Wars content, like I don't have this much Jack Bauer 24 content. It died and it's gone, and I mean everything comes back now, but to have a true, tried and true zombie story in the midst of Star Wars is pretty cool, and it's still cool to this day. And I miss it. I miss that freewheeling aspect, and it's gone, I think, from the canon books.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point of view. I like that a lot. We wouldn't even have this book at all, in today's Star Wars. So at least we had it and we got to enjoy it all together. That's great. Eric, final thoughts and re-rate.
Um, yeah, I think Schreiber's a great writer. I think that I really enjoyed this because of its unique voice, and I think I didn't talk too much about the specifics of kind of the internal monologues of a lot of characters, but I think that he did a really nice job with that, especially with Chewie. I think we don't get a lot of Chewie internal monologue for decent reason. Like I kind of like the ambiguity of the growls and stuff here and there, and we figure out what he's saying by Han and others. But I thought he did a really nice job with that, and seeing Chewie have the primal thoughts and also the horrified thoughts for a character that is so strong was very, very powerful for me. So props for the Chewie writing. I'm gonna stick with my enthusiastic 8. I had a great time with it. I think it's a great genre book. Highly recommend people check it out, and I just had a blast. And to all the other authors out there, give me those short chapters, man. Love it. Please keep that going.
Okay, fantastic. Well, guys, this was a whole lot of fun. I'm really glad that we chose this book for October. It was perfect for this time of the year, leading us right into Halloween. It was a whole lot of fun. It was as disgusting and as horrifying as I possibly could have hoped it could have been. So for everyone who may be watching now or listening later on, thank you so much for joining us. We had a lot of fun discussing this. We hope you guys had as much fun listening to it. If you are interested in joining us for the next roundtable that we're going to do, that's going to be at the end of November, and we are going to be reading Star Wars Battlefront 2 Inferno Squad. So we had a quick mention of Iden Versio here. We're going to be talking a whole lot about her next month. So keep an eye out on Facebook or Twitter and all of our social media where we will be letting you know exactly when you can catch that. Otherwise, if you are in need of that book, you can find that in any of your other Star Wars book needs over at youtini.com. We would all highly recommend it. So you can find
both
anything.
The paperback and the hardcover.
Yeah, good point. So if you want that hardcover, we've got that for you as well. So on that note, for all of us here at Youtini, have a happy Halloween, and may the Force be with you. Bye, guys.
Bye bye.